Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Recently we did a video where we discussed the 10 most honorable deaths in the Clone Wars. Many of the clones we discussed in this video were famous or at least fan favorites. But for every Fives and Hardcase, there were dozens of unnamed clones who died for the Republic. Since death is permanent, and in the case of the clones quite unjust because they were essentially born into servitude, we will continue to honor the fallen by telling their stories. Today we'll be looking at the 10 least honorable deaths during the Clone Wars, and although we might not remember the names of many of these clones, we will definitely remember the terrible ways that they died. Throwing a punch isn't just about throwing your arms around randomly. There's a technique and a lot of coordination required. It starts off down by your feet, works your way up to your hip and your torso, and finally up to your arm into your fist. This is why punching something is not necessarily easy, especially when you're trying to punch a battle droid which is made out of metal. And so when this unnamed clone of the 212th Attack Battalion attempts to punch a droid in the face, he clearly injures his hand. What's interesting here is that his adrenaline doesn't kick in, shielding him from that pain so he can continue to fight. And so instead of continuing to try to destroy the battle droid he's fighting, he pauses and gets shot. It should be noted that the clone does get his blaster rifle shot out of his hand in the very beginning of the sequence. It's very likely that he panicked once he realized he was no longer holding a weapon, which is why he tried to punch a droid in the face. Commander Cody understands the limitations of hand-to-hand combat. That's why he's running through droids with a flurry of kicks and rifle butts. If you do have to get into a melee fight, these are preferable methods. Unfortunately for our unlucky clone, he died without a rifle in his hand, which is a pretty dishonorable death if you ask me. The Rishi Moon listening post might have been a relatively small operation, but it guarded the only approach to the Camino system, home of all the clones and the only clone production facility operated by the Grand Army of the Republic. Without Camino, the Republic would be doomed and they would have no way to replenish their men. CT-327 was a deck officer on duty when a strange meteor shower impacted around the outpost. While on foot patrol, CT-327 is ambushed by a squad of commando droids who had hitched a ride on those meteors. After killing him, they steal his armor and helmet and use his appearance to impersonate their way into a base. One of our heroes in our last video about honorable clone deaths, CT-782 Heavy, manages to warn the Republic and sacrifices his life to save the day. CT-327's part of the battle was a lot less honorable. I mean, no one wants to be used like a sock puppet by a bunch of droids, but nonetheless, he was a part of the heroic defense of the Rishi listening post. Humans are supposed to eat plants, not the other way around. If you watch this channel on the reg, you'll probably be familiar with the world of Umbara and how it was a terrible place for the clones to be. It was perpetually dark there, it was very moist, there were carnivorous plants and turncoat Jedis. During the initial invasion, one of our heroes from our last list, Hardcase, accidentally trips over a giant vine. This wakes up a giant Vixus, a large carnivorous plant with several tentacles, which are used to grab clone troopers, which are then shoved into its large, sharp, teeth-lined mouth. Hardcase never stops firing his Gatling blasters and manages to escape from one of these tentacles. But one of Hardcase's brothers in the 501st isn't all that lucky and gets latched onto by the monster's tongue, and he is quickly devoured. Fives finally manages to put an end to this thing's rampage by throwing a grenade into its mouth. Now, if that trooper is still alive inside the plant, he no longer is, because explosion. Now, is getting eaten by a carnivorous plant dishonorable in itself? Does it make you less of a man? Probably not, but you most likely won't have an open casket funeral, which probably means that you did have a dishonorable death. An infantry soldier enjoys having both feet planted on the ground. They get scared when they're on boats or planes or spaceships. It makes sense. And that's because they're no longer in control of their environment and in control of where they are going. On the terrible world of Umbara, there are not only carnivorous plants, but there are also flying monsters known as Banshees. Well, they're actually more like flying crab monsters, which makes them worse. Although these flying monsters are no larger than a dog, they're powerful enough to pick up a full-grown clone and fly away with them. They were a complete menace on the battlefield during the conflict and after, because they really liked going after corpses. While on the march towards their objective, the 501st, under the command of Pong Krell, run into a pair of these monsters. Two clones, including an advanced recon force scout trooper on an ATRT, get picked up by these monsters. Pong Krell manages to save one of the clones with some impressive force field attacks, but the ARF trooper is unfortunately never seen again. He'll most likely get marked off as MIA. He had a very dishonorable death. Probably got eaten alive in a nest of Banshees. We're not quite done with Umbara yet because, again, it was a terrible place. Towards the end of the battle, as Republic troops surrounded the capital city of the planet, General Ponkrell decides to create havoc amongst the clone ranks. He sends out a message to the 501st and the 212th stating that Umbaran militia have captured clone trooper armor and weapons and were now pretending to be clones. Ponkrell then feeds the same coordinates to both units for the location of the enemy, and when they arrive, they begin firing at one another. The firefight goes on long enough that even mortars are called in. Several clones died in this meaningless firefight amongst brothers. This was a complete waste of life, and it's terribly sad to watch Platoon Leader Waxer shed a tear as he succumbs to his wounds. It's a most dishonorable death to die fighting your own brothers. When the Separatist superweapon known as the Malevolence started preying on the Republic Navy, entire fleets would go missing without a trace. The key to the Malevolence's destructive power was a gigantic ion cannon, which could disable any ship that got caught in its massive beam. Once the Republic naval ship was disabled, the Malevolence would just open fire with banks and banks of turbo lasers. It was a terrible situation and not at all survivable. The clones that were lucky enough to be near lifeboats would make it out, but these escape pods needed to be recovered ASAP as they had limited mobility and supplies. In order to make sure that no one made it back to Republic Command with information about the Malevolence, the Separatist Navy would employ teams of droids to mop up any survivors that were still around. When Plo Koon's fleet is destroyed, a pod of clone Navy crewmen are cut off drifting without power in their pod. These clones aren't wearing any Phase 1 armor, which can actually be sealed against vacuum. A team of B-1 battle droids equipped with thrusters and welders grab onto this unfortunate pod. They crack open the front windshield, venting the clones into vacuum and to their deaths. This was an extremely dishonorable death that goes to showcase just how cruel this Clone Wars could be, especially when it comes to the treatment of surrendered combatants. We recently did a video about Separatist weapons designed specifically to harm organics and at the same time could avoid harming droids. The Republic also developed a similar weapon, except it only destroys electronics and keeps organics alive. Meet the electro-proton bomb. This was an extremely powerful weapon that could generate a massive EMP which could deactivate entire droid armies. During the Battle of Malstar, the Republic first demonstrated the awesome power of the electro bomb by stopping a large battle formation of droids. The explosion from this weapon was so great that it ended up creating a massive sinkhole underneath the battlefield. While the clones mainly escaped the damage of the electro-proton bomb, those caught in the area where the sinkhole opened up were abruptly dropped hundreds of feet down to their death, including this poor clone trooper piloting an ATTE, which lost its power after being hit by an EMP. This guy never really made it a chance, and like a lot of these dishonorable deaths, his body is probably not going to be recovered. He's probably going to be listed as MIA. The story of the 332nd was a tragic one. This detachment came from the famous 501st and were one of the most decorated and experienced units in the entire Clone Wars. They were also one of the few clone units led by a caring and competent Jedi leader. While Order 66 was necessary for some of the Jedi generals who got out of hand, Ahsoka Tano was no longer even a Jedi when her former comrades came after her. Ahsoka Tano and Captain Rex tried their best not to kill their former friends and allies, but the inhibitor chips in their brains made them rabid in their pursuit. Ultimately, ARC Trooper Jesse would not only fail his mission to kill Ahsoka Tano, he and the rest of the 332nd would all perish after their Star Destroyer crashed into the surface of a planet. Ahsoka Tano and Captain Rex would take the time to bury Jesse and all the clones they killed, but their deaths were senseless, lacking honor, and completely avoidable. During the ground invasion of Ryloth, a small detachment of Republic troops under the command of Obi-Wan Kenobi preceded the main body of the invasion. Their mission was to take out key Separatist anti-air defenses that had already shot down an entire Acclimator-class assault ship with thousands of clones on it. The clones sent out several patrols into a deserted Twi'lek city. Ryloth is home to all sorts of dangerous predators, and the Separatist Alliance started breeding a very dangerous predator known as a Gutkur. Imagine a velociraptor that also happens to be a giant insect. The Gutkar proves to be a huge problem for the clones. Their weapons hardly seem to do any damage against the Gutkar's exoskeleton. Obi-Wan and his troops are forced to retreat. One clone is immediately knocked out and quickly consumed by the pack. Obi-Wan Kenobi manages to distract the Gutkars later on and saves everyone else, but now they're down one clone and his body has been chewed beyond recognition. It is a most dishonorable death. The Jedi rescue mission to the Citadel was supposed to be extremely challenging. Anakin Skywalker even refused to bring along his Padawan Ahsoka Tano for the mission because he believed that she wasn't ready. The Citadel was unlike any other prison in the galaxy because it was mainly created to hold rogue Jedi in place. A small team of Jedi and clone troopers are assembled for this mission. They'll have to be frozen in carbonite to sneak past the exterior prison defenses, and then they'll have to navigate a series of challenging obstacles and interior defenses to reach the prisoners they want to extract. Clone Trooper Charger, a member of the 501st Legion, was with the team when they began scaling a cliffside to reach one of the entrances to the prison. Charger was bringing up the rear when one of the stones that was supporting his weight broke off. This sends Charger plummeting into a river of toxic sulfur. But before he can reach that river, he hits an electro mine which kills him immediately and then sets off an alarm all around the base. His death was unlucky, and it really wasn't his fault, but it was also very dishonorable and endangered his fellow comrades. Okay, there you have it, guys. As you can see, the Clone Wars was full of awful moments. Very few people actually got the heroic deaths that they wanted. They were much more likely to die in some very terrible, tragic way that was either dishonorable to them or embarrassing or just all around terrible. So, don't romanticize war. It's not a good thing to do. Also, guys, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.